All right, so welcome everyone. I know folks will trickle in, so I'll spend a little bit of time on the opening slide. Welcome to the CV workshop for promotion to professor here at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. Um, I'm Lauren Pecorello. I'm the Senior Associate Dean for Faculty Wellbeing and Development, and I'm a professor in the Department of Medicine. And I recently was promoted, although maybe it's not so recent, it's a little over a year and a half ago, but I feel like I'm close enough that I feel kind of connected to this process. So I'm really happy to be leading this session today. Dr. Rina Karani is going to be joining us to discuss the narrative medicine sections. And I wanted to just give a special shout out to Dr. Catherine Chen, who really started these slides and wasn't able to join us this year, but has gifted me the slides and I've tweaked them a little bit today for today's session. And just wanted to remind you that this is sponsored by the Office of Faculty Development, and of course, all the departments and offices of the folks that are joining us today. So, let me just review our objectives and agenda. So we're going to start with reviewing a very brief guidelines for reviewers. I know it's not exactly the CV, but it's always a question that comes up, so I want to make sure we cover it. Then we're going to describe the CV template and the criteria by track. Again, very briefly, the criteria. This is not a session on APT sort of tracks. Then we will talk about the narrative CV sections. And then finally, we'll break out into our small groups for a Q&A. Okay, so the very first step in thinking about preparation for promotion and creating your CV is just to figure out what track you are in. And I've listed here the 5 tracks, and I will review very brief descriptions of each one just so you can get a sense of where you might fit. Hopefully, because you're moving on to professor, you know already, but I do know that there are some people that sometimes wonder if they should be switching tracks depending on how their career might be adjusting, given whatever circumstance you might be in. Um, okay, so the clinical practice and administrative leadership track is for full-time faculty physicians and select other clinically oriented faculty. So, for example, psychologists may be in this track, sometimes nurse practitioners or PhD nurses who devote 90% or more of their professional activities to clinical practice, clinical teaching, clinical lab leadership, or leadership roles in clinical administration. Our research track is really scientists who are members of a research team and support the activities of multiple or a single investigator or a shared resource facility. They may also play a substantial institutional leadership role and are not expected to direct independent research programs. Your clinical educator and or scientist educator track. This is the new vision of the previous clinician educator track, which really aims to define what it's like to be a clinician educator or a scientist educator so that those two are very distinct within a single track. And within our smaller sessions, we may have a few minutes to talk about the addendum for both this track and the first track listed. But anyway, this track is for physicians and or scientists who demonstrate scholarly approach to teaching and education practice and contribute to the dissemination of knowledge in a clinical or scientific field in health professions or in the practice of biomedical education. Then, of course, we have our investigator track, which is full-time faculty members with scholarly output that includes high-quality publications, acquisition of extramural funding, and evidence of innovation and broadening impact over time. And then finally, our voluntary track. So these are physicians, clinicians, or scientists who generally are not employed by the institution but may have privileges, or who may be part-time employees with another employer elsewhere, but who provide invaluable clinical, educational, administrative, and research contributions to the Icahn School of Medicine. Okay, and I wanted to do a word on tenure today, especially because this is a professor session, but also because it came up in a few of the questions, with the caveat that there are more specific criteria coming as we understand it. The tenure is possible within four of the five tracks. So CPAL does not offer tenure as of now. And the general criteria is that the candidate demonstrates the ability for continued superior productivity and leadership in their field and excellence in the dissemination of knowledge. And the recommendation for tenure is decided by the department chair, but of course it's a discussion with you and the department chair, right? So you're going to go to them and say, hey, I think I deserve tenure and this is why, and they're going to say yes or no in terms of putting you up. It does not have to be tied to your promotion for associate or professor, but it certainly can be if you so choose. Okay, so before I get into the CV, this is the final slide just to understand the process and keep in mind that this is for the Department of Medicine. It might be slightly different for other departments, but the five core elements that are needed to sort of put you forward to promotion are included on this slide. So the first thing to do is to get your CV ready, which we're going to talk about today. But you also want to think about crafting a chair statement. In most departments, I understand that faculty actually will craft these, at least a draft of this themselves. It's actually a useful exercise, albeit uncomfortable, but it does really help you to sort of really reflect on all the work you've done and think about how you're contributing both to the institution and generally to medicine and biomedical science in general. So it's a nice way of really thinking about who you are and branding and marketing that. So again, uncomfortable but important. And then finally, the addendum, which is not in every single track, but as at least in the CPAL and the CESE track. So those are the three things you need to get together first. In our department, it goes through a division A&P committee. Again, if you don't have divisions or they're very small, this might not apply. And then it goes through a department A&P committee. This is the case in most departments, although again, there are some small departments where this does not exist. And you may need to just, have a single person that reviews this for you. If all that is good to go from the department level, then you want to make sure that you get all your referees together, the names of people that you're going to list as people that are going to essentially nominate you, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then you want to get your list of publications together. And this depends on which you're going for, but I believe for professor, you need 5 citations of publications. And this then gets uploaded to Sinai Central. And you will do this, at least part of this, you will do the uploading to Sinai Central, and you will be inputting the names. Then it goes to the sort of beginning of the A&P committee where they vet the rank and track and make sure that you are in the right place. And if that's okay, reviewers will be contacted. And I meant to put a little figure up here, but this is the bottleneck, reviewers, right? So one of the things that I mentioned during our session on Monday is that you are allowed to contact your potential reviewers ahead of time, keeping in mind that you are not the official way that they will submit anything, but you can contact them, whether you know them or not, sort of give an introduction, say how much you admire their work, and ask them if they would be willing to write you a strong letter of nomination for or reference for your promotion to professor. If they respond enthusiastically, you know that they are hopefully going to write you a good letter. If you get no response or a, negative response, that's okay. It means that they were probably not the right people, and you can sort of continue to find others that might work. And that can help you sort of create your list. So this is something that you might do on the side once you've created your CV, and you can share with those potential reviewers your CV and how the two of you may have sort of career likenesses, something about your careers that they might be interested in that they will be able to comment on. This also came up in the other session. They don't have to be in your same department, maybe even not in your field, although they should be field adjacent, so they should have an understanding of your field. So for example, as a medical educator in medicine, it might be appropriate for me to have a pediatrician write me a letter of nomination if they also have some similarities in their career. Maybe they also do well-being work, something like that. So think about not just within your department, but within your general fields of work. Okay. And then it goes to the subcommittee. And if the subcommittee believes that you're ready to be promoted, it goes to the full committee for approval and then on to the dean. And actually, what's not here is on to the board. And all of that process happens. It's very unlikely that once you've gone through subcommittee review with a yes, that you'll get any no's, beyond that. All right, so that was that. All right, again, let me try to go through this reviewer um, part quickly. They're all pretty similar. So it's really about the numbers. So the reviewers for the voluntary track in the professor is 15. And again, they should be geographically diverse, recognize experts in their field, and at the professor rank. They can also be a senior stature if they're a reviewer from a government or industry. They should not be internal to Mount Sinai, former mentors, individuals with whom you have collaborated with during the past 3 years, and no more than 2 reviewers from the same institution. So reviewers for the research track, 10, there should be 10 if you are going up without tenure, 15 with tenure. Again, they should be geographically diverse. They should be at the professor rank or higher. And again, these criteria are pretty much the same as the previous one. You can't have collaborated with them in the past 3 years. Also, I'll just mention if Corinne is able to drop into the chat the actual grid of this so people can have it for their reference. For clinical practice administrative track, again, we have 10 reviewers, and again, they should be geographically diverse, recognize experts in their field, and at the professor rank. They should not be internal. There should be no more than 2 from the same institution. I'm just going to check back the voluntary one. I'm not sure it needs that many reviewers, but we'll just double check and make sure that that's correct. The reviewers for the clinician educator or scientist educator track requires 15 reviewers. Again, similar criteria on the yes side. In terms of the right side, similar. They can't have worked at Mount Sinai for at least 4 years. They can't be former mentors. They can't be folks that you've collaborated with recently, and no more than 2 from the same institution. And then finally, for the investigator track, similar on the left-hand side. The only difference on the right is you can't have collaborated with them in the past 3 years. All right, so that's your reviewers. I know there's a lot of reviewers you need to get. That can be sort of a different conversation, but it's good to start thinking about it early. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the CV. Most important thing is to keep track of every output. Hopefully all of you know this already since you've been promoted to associate, but every time you're asked to do something, you give a talk, you teach, you collaborate with another scientist, whatever it is that you're doing, keep track of it. Put it on your CV, put the dates, put the title, even if it's not pretty yet, just put it on there so it's there. Number 2, and again, many of you should know this already, but we're not going to be relating a lot of prehistory that's from undergraduate and graduate education. We're really going to talk mostly about sort of postdoc, fellowship, attending, or slash, faculty scientist and beyond. Certainly, you have to include your education, degrees, and honors. You have to include all your publications. But in terms of the stuff that happened pre-work, you're only going to include major accomplishments and major awards. Formatting. So make sure you add numbers. Make sure you follow these formatting guidelines. So 10 to 12-inch font, generally basic fonts, and 1-inch margins. And then, of course, send your CV as a PDF or upload it as a PDF, not as a Word document. Make sure you conform to the CV template. So that's what we're going to enter into right now. Reminder that the CV format is the same for all tracks and that you should make sure to note any reasons for gaps in employment. This red on the right-hand side here is very important. Do not leave any sections out or blank. If it doesn't apply to you, that's fine. Just write not applicable or none and list information under each heading in chronological order. Okay, that's really, really important. And I think I'm emphasizing that on the next slide. So chronological order, oldest to newest. And I forgot to put the extra Y there. But so dates must be in month, year format if it happened in the last 5 years. Okay, so otherwise it's just the year. But if it happened in the last 5 years, month, year, month, and year. Okay. So what I'm going to do for the remainder of my little section here is just include a little bit of what it looks like. I took some excerpts from my own um, CV and just to give you a sense, right? So these are all appointments that happened many, many years ago. So I'm just including the years. Um, Education here, I'm just including very basic things, my postdoctoral training, my certification, and my licensure. Um, this slide I'm highlighting specifically for the honors and down. So again, honors are in chronological order. The ones that are older, should really be the big ones, but certainly the more recent ones, make sure you include everything. I'll just mention for patents and other entrepreneurial activities, I put not applicable for myself, but if it does apply to you, make sure you include that. And then other professional roles. So I wanted just to highlight this section because it can be confusing with what's later on, which is administrative leadership appointments. So other professional roles are going to be generally elected memberships, appointed memberships, reviewers, extramural service, but not leadership of those things. So if you are on a study section, you would include it here. But if you lead a study section, then you're going to include that in administrative leadership appointments. So that's the major distinction here. So this is just the way that I organized it. I have sort of extramural service, national, regional, and reviewer activities, and then I have intramural service at Mount Sinai. Narrative medicine section, stay tuned. Grants, contracts, and foundation support. Make sure you follow all of the guidelines and what's required in the grid. I'm not going to go into this in detail because it's very clear on the CV template, which we will also drop into the chat. But just make sure you follow the instructions for this. And if you have no grants, again, right, not applicable. Same thing for clinical trials participation. Make sure you include all of the information that they are asking for. Trainees. So trainees are people, literal names of people that you're going to list that are folks that you have mentored or trained individually in some form during your career. So it's not all of the people that you taught in a class of, 20 to 100 people. It's people that you have either advised in their career, mentored on a research project. Maybe it's someone that you had a very intense clinical rotation with, where you were really the sole person that was sort of teaching them. So it's really more of an individual relationship. And you want to start from the beginning. So it's really important that you keep track of all of this because you can quickly lose track of it as trainees graduate and move on. Okay, teaching activities. These are any activities generally for a larger group that are recurrent, typically. It may not always be the case that they're recurrent, but it's often recurrent courses that you're teaching, curriculum that you're developing, recurrent lectures that you're giving. This is different from when we get to invited lectures. Okay, so now it's the administrative leadership appointment section. You have three potential internal sections: research, education, and general administration, and then external leadership. I'm just going to show you a little bit of how I did it. Keep in mind, this should really show your role and then the active things that you're actually doing. And you may also want to share a success that happened with a particular team that you're leading. Okay. Publications, make sure to access your H index from Google Scholar and include the date accessed. For any publications that you are not first or last author or second author, make sure you include what your contribution was. Make sure that you mark any recent publications since your previous promotion as with an asterisk, and then of course number in chronological order, oldest to newest, and then you should have additional subheadings besides your original peer-reviewed publications. You should also include other peer-reviewed publications, books and book chapters, non-peer-reviewed publications. So that's an H index, and that's just an example of if something was published after your last promotion and what you did for it. Okay, almost done. So invited presentations. These are presentations that someone asked you to do or that were accepted as an oral presentation at a national meeting. So think about, visiting professorships, grand rounds, symposia, moderation of events that you may have been invited to do. And if you have a lot, you may want to categorize them as national, regional, and local. Also include any media resource education materials. So videos, web-based publications, podcasts, maybe you were on a news show. Make sure that you include any of those. And then also any voluntary presentations, which are typically going to be posters. And again, this is just an example. Invited presentations, I categorize them as national, international, regional, and local. And then media resource educational materials, I included these different categories. Okay, is Rena here?
I am, Lauren.
Yay.
Yeah.
All right, I will drive for you.
All right, thanks so much. So hi, everyone. We're just going to talk about, very briefly before we go into groups, since we want to have some time for you to do that, talk about the narrative sections in the Sinai CV, just as an FYI. There are some institutions that have narrative sections. We are one of those organizations, and I actually think it's a real strength of our paperwork that allows you to kind of describe the impact and outcomes in a variety of buckets. These 4 buckets that you see here, the research profile, clinical profile, mentoring profile, and the overall impact, really gives you a chance to use your language and words to show the demonstrated impact of your work. It is not an opportunity for you to rehash what is already there. And each of these sections has a word count that we really ask you to respect. You do not want the individuals on the APT committee or the people receiving your CV to be sort of sitting there reading pages and pages of summary. So really remember that the research, clinical, mentoring are limited to 250 words, and the overall impact narrative statement is limited to 500. Next slide, please, Lauren. So the sticking to the word count, I cannot say it enough. Who sees these? So your external reviewer gets your CV, right? So they will see these narrative sections, which is part of your CV. The external reviewers do not get your chair letter. So if you think about why I'm putting that statement in there, it's really to say that this is one of your singular opportunities for those who are your external reviewers to glean from all this information provided on your CV, if you will, the evidence of impact of your outcomes, right? So this is a really powerful way in a very short number of words to really clarify that for those external reviewers. Our guidance is to really explain impact and outcome. This is not an opportunity to rehash, as I've said before, because if we see a lot of the rehashing, and there's really no point in doing that, you're really not using the word count to your favor. So for the research profile, it differs, of course, depending on which track you're on. So if you are on the research track, you might be describing the research accomplishments and their impact. If you're an educator, this is where you might speak about the scholarly work you're engaged in the broad scheme of educational work. You might talk about the other ways that the dissemination of your work has had an impact. As a clinician, if you're on the CPAL track, you might be able to describe the work that you've had, the impact of your work on QI, practice enhancements, clinical care, patient experiences, or clinical research for that matter, if you're involved in that. So back again, sorry, one back again. Thank you. And then for administration, we do not want to really minimize the fact that you have a lot of impact if you are participating in administration, even if you don't see your work traditionally as in the domain of research. It's really, again, thinking about the impact of what you have done in the sphere of administration on how programs are run, protocols are driven, safety, process-related work that you've done. It's really, if you think of the research profile, it's a chance to think about the scholarly impact of whatever it is that you do. Next, please. The clinical profile, for those who are not involved in clinical work, this is where you'd put not applicable. Just as a tip, there's no part of the Sinai CV that you should eliminate the subcategory for. So even if there's, for example, patents and you don't have patents, just write not applicable. So don't just delete the subheading, just make sure the subheadings are all there. And in the case of the clinical profile, if you're not clinically practicing, that's where you write not applicable or no clinical work. And in that profile, this is your chance to talk a little bit about the specific areas of expertise and focus. What are you sought after for? Where do you get patient referrals for? What is a summary of patient satisfaction? Maybe you've been honored with awards. Maybe your quality metrics are far ahead of what the standards are. Really trying to, again, show evidence of impact, not, oh, I see this many patients and that's all I see. It might be that you have a large volume, but they come from far. They seek you out. You've had a very high satisfaction scores. And this is how you're showing that the reach of your clinical work, for example, is regional or national. The overall impact section is where you are really trying to describe the significance and impact of all your professional activities, which is why it has a higher word count max. This is to really think about the portfolio of your work writ large. And thinking about, when you think about the levels expected for advancement, right, at the professor level, you are expected to, in almost every track, show evidence of national impact. In the case of the investigator track, you're expected to show evidence of national, but with international recognition. So you want this paragraph to really reflect that level of impact. And this is your chance to kind of, again, sort of synthesize the levels of impact across your portfolio of work. Next slide, please. The mentoring profile is the other profile that is a narrative. Lauren went through the table where you will be listing the person, your role, the years, and what their current status is. So this is not asking you to repeat that information. It's really, again, to talk about your impact as a mentor to whoever it is that you're spending most of your time mentoring, to really think about noteworthy successes that can be partially at least attributable to your mentoring efforts. This is an opportunity for you to talk about, to sort of distill down that if you say your focus tends to be, say, graduate medical education trainees or young researchers or investigators, it's really this opportunity to sort of synthesize and say, this is the direction of work that I do in mentoring. This is my overall mission and goal. Here's evidence of the impact of that when I think about that population that I've been predominantly mentoring. And then we'd like you to end with realizing that this is a lifelong learning skill. And so you might be able to say, and I'm also extremely committed to developing my own mentoring skills through participation in faculty professional development or through a program of enhancing my own skills, or this is how you're keeping abreast with the new literature in mentoring, just to show that this is, again, not a stagnant skill we have. It's really something we grow and get better at and are committed to as we go forward. Next slide. So, I wanted to, if you go back, I'm just going to highlight, Lauren, the fact that I've talked about kind of this word count. I just want to give you some examples that really address this idea of impact, that really are attributable to your efforts, and really this commitment to your own skills. So I just have some samples here, thanks to those individuals who have shared those with us. But here are some examples. Again, not for you to copy, but just for you to get a sense of how someone might write this. So this person is talking about having a role in a residency track in medical education. What they do is they provide mentorship to this wide network of trainees within this department. They do list the total number. They indicate that a certain number of those residents have completed a program. They also have supported educational scholarship developed by training that has been presented both internally and externally. They even list some of those, and that they provide career mentorship to the chief residents of that department and up to a certain number of residents per year. So again, just sort of, I think they're scoping up to show the sort of impact through numbers and outcomes. Next sample, please. This is an individual who talks about mentoring across the continuum from high school through undergraduate, graduate, and fellow education related to a variety of areas. They participate in national mentoring programs as well. They talk about mentoring and advising a certain number of degree students and then monitoring the career outcomes of those graduates. And then this idea of also, in this case, this individual's commitment to the future of mentoring is also this newer method where they're managing an account for aspiring physician scientists to really think about sort of mentoring outside of the academic institution in which this person spends their time. Next step. This is, again, another person who's talking about their supervision and mentorship. They talk about how the impact they've had on career path. They've talked about how their graduates have transitioned to academic faculty and leadership roles. And then they've talked about, in this particular paragraph, how this person is enhancing their own mentoring skills. So just another example, all three quite different, but just to give you a flavor. Next slide. So the key take-home points about all these narrative sections is really this is quite a unique way for you to share your involvement in and commitment to really mission-critical areas for Sinai. Please do not rehash what's in your CV. You don't need to. Your CV is read and respected and looked at very closely. This is an effort to share outcomes and impact, and then to describe how we are all on a learning journey in these areas. And I think that what's nicest about this is that as you develop your CV written and your portfolio for promotion to professor, this is a great opportunity for you to say, well, wow, this area seems an area of opportunity for me to get to learn more or to grow more or to get more involved. And so that kind of feedback that you get from just building this entire CV, but also your narrative section, really is a great a part of our Sinai system. Next slide. All right, I'll turn it back to the main panel for how we move forward.
I think we are ready to go into our rooms. Naomi was great enough to answer one of the questions in the chat, so appreciate that. So we're going to go ahead and into our rooms, and once there, we'll talk specifically about the two tracks that we will be in each room. So we're going to go into a CPAL and CESE track, so sort of more on the clinical side, although there are some scientists that may be in that track as well. And then the investigator and the research tracks. We have some panelists here that will be helping us figure out how we can be most helpful to you. So go when you're ready, Sam, we can go into those rooms.
We are now starting the breakout room for the clinical practice and/or administrative leadership track and the clinician educator or scientist educator track.
Hi, everyone. Before we get started, I would love for our panelists just to introduce themselves. We'll start with Dr. Reena Karani.
Hi, friends. Reena Karani, Professor of Medicine, Medical Education, and Geriatrics and Palliative Medicine on the CESE track, in those days called something completely different, and direct our Institute for Medical Education as well as serve on APT. And my big focus has been the CESE track and its renewal process a couple of years ago.
Awesome. Dr. Meg Rosenblatt.
Hi, everybody. I'm Meg Rosenblatt. I'm the site chair of anesthesia at Morningside and West, and I sit on the committee with everybody. And something that Lauren said yesterday that was kind of important was that I didn't realize before, but it's, we talk a lot about your CV, and applying the rules and getting the CV really helps us help you, because we spend a lot of time looking at your applications, and if things are where they belong, it's easier for us to see them. So we do appreciate your being a little fastidious about making sure your CV complies to our outline. But there is a reason. I just wanted you to know. Thank you.
And Isabel.
Yes, hi, Isabel Fiel. I'm professor of pathology. I am also vice chair for wellness, well-being, and faculty development. Hi, everyone.
All right, so I was just pulling up our questions that I seem to have lost momentarily. So give me 1 second and I will get those all sorted out. Okay. And I think these might be from the other one. Why don't we start with this? I think this is a really good question to start with. So what are some common mistakes that you've all seen that have been made on the CV? And maybe as a second sort of follow-up to that, what are some things that people feel that they should have spent more time on the CV?
I can answer that. When we look at a CV of a candidate and there's a lot of spelling mistakes, the CV format is not followed, immediately that's a red flag. And that makes the reviewer look more closely and into what's going on. Why is this? Why are there a lot of misspellings and just sloppy work is really not a good thing when you submit your CV to the APT for review. So that's a red flag, maybe.
Thank you. Rena or Meg, do you have any other things that sort of make you anxious when you get a CV?
Not anxious, but I really like reading the narrative parts. I know Rena spoke a lot about them, but it really tells us what you think is so important about you. And we want you to brag so that we can brag about you when we present you to our committee.
I would probably just add a couple of things. One is that if there are gaps, you have not addressed them. You must address them. Do not feel like you're going to be judged by the gaps. The key is to explain the gaps, right? There's periods of time in all our lives where we might have to take a pause or take a different route or whatever. Make sure you address them and don't pretend that, because that's a red flag to somebody when you see something that's a big gap and it hasn't been raised. I've been very proud of individuals who have submitted their materials and noted when they've taken gaps for parental leave or experiences that they need to have for their family or caregiving. Acknowledge it. It's a journey, and by pretending it's not there, I think we sort of do ourselves a disservice. That's the first. The second is not updating your CV. You do not want this process to be delayed by having a CV that's not updated and us saying, please turn it back to the office, and the office sends it back, and it puts a whole nother wrench into the timeline. So make sure your CV is updated, which is why putting into your calendar a recurring meeting that's either every 3 months, every 6 months to update your CV and keep it ready is not only good for APT, but it's really good for you because there might be a chair who reaches out and says, I want to nominate you for an award or something, and I need your CV today. And then you're like scurrying around. So having a sort of recurring meeting allows you to keep that updated. And the last I would add is not following guidelines, which is that the Sinai CV has a very particular format. And that's not just to be, rigid, but it's that people like Isabel and Meg and I spend a lot of time reading a lot of them. And if the things are out of order or they're missing sections, it does not allow us to kind of use the way our eyes are trained. And then we will really have not the opportunity to kind of sell you the best we can when things are all over the place. So really following the guidelines would be my third point.
Thank you. So my next question is the magic number question. So a couple people asked in their pre-questions, is there sort of a magic number of publications or a magic number of presentations, invited presentations that folks need to give to be promoted to professor?
It's more of showing a continuation of learning. If everything stops in 2022 and we get your CV in 2025, we're going to want to know what you've been doing for the last 3 years. So, we look at your H index. We look at the places where you're publishing as much as we look at the raw number, but just have a continuous, we want to see you if you're lecturing locally, move to the national level, which you need for this level, or even internationally. And again, just lifelong productivity.
I agree. It's more of the quality of the publications and your role in it. If you have 30 publications, but you're a middle author in 29 of them, that's also something that's probably not doing you a favor if you apply for professorship. First authorship, senior authorship, and if you're in the middle author, just indicate what your role was and how you made things happen. So that's really very important. And as this is a topic, an issue that we discussed during our clinical subcommittee as far as the number of publications and the number of invited talks. But eventually it's the, again, the quality and not just a specific number that we base our decision on.
And just to add one more thing, there is never a process in the APT of any bean counting. There is no section where we're like 6, 12, 14. It does not happen And please know that with all the integrity of everybody in this committee, there's never sort of counts like that.
What we do count, though, is the number of letters you are asked for and the number of letters that are received. Please really reach out to your letter writers and sort of get maybe a verbal commitment that they will do it. People get tied up and things don't get done, but we're going to be asking for 15. If we see 4, somebody's going to smell a rat. You know, at least 8, 9 have to show up.
And the APT office does a huge amount to follow up. Every 2 and 3 weeks, they're following up. So they are working on your behalf. They're not just waiting for it to come and then being like, oh, it didn't come. They're trying really, really hard, which is why reaching them out before is really good. For example, when I was going up, there was a person on my list who said, I'm actually going to be on sabbatical for that period of time. And I'm going to be in a completely different country. So that helped me not put that person on the list, right? It was sort of in advance as opposed to waiting for the person to not respond.
Martine, do you want to ask your question?
Oh, sorry. It was just a quick question along the lines of the letter writers. And I don't know if this was addressed. Is it okay to have the same list of letter writers that you had for associate, like going up, or you need a total different list of folks?
I believe you need a new list, but they can
But if they've
clarify.
been promoted, that's assuming all of your last list has gotten promoted ahead of you also. These all have to be professors.
Right. No. So yes, I understand that they have to be at least at the academic level above that you're applying for, but could the names, or you were asked, right, for a whole new list of folks? I don't know. I'm clear.
Martine, I would try and have some variation. I'm not saying we go back. No one goes back to the folder from whatever year it was published. But I do think that having some breadth outside of the same group of people is helpful.
Again, your progression should have brought you from a regional, local level to a national so there should be people you've met along the way that have been equally as impressed with you as we will be.
So for folks on the call, feel free to raise your hand or pop questions in the chat. I do have some other questions that I could bring up. One of the other questions is, do you need an international presence to be promoted to full professor?
No, but the investigator track is quite specific, so not for the individuals in this room.
Okay. And the other question was about sort of someone who has a portfolio that really has both research and education balanced out. How does that person, again, or someone in general who has that kind of a portfolio, where should they position themselves to be promoted? They didn't really ask about track specifically, but maybe that's what they're getting at.
Brina, do you want to talk a little bit more about the addendum, because that's going to be their winning spot?
Right. So Meg brings up a good point. So one is that, people on the CESE track phenotypically see themselves with that common word, right? The educator phenomena. That's their phenotype. They might be doing clinical work with education. They might be doing research work with education. They might be doing science with education. But the phenotype is an educator. And the portfolio that we have, which is the information addendum, allows you to think about the outputs and work and areas that are really related to what educators do and how they spend their time. And that's the reason for that addendum, is that it went beyond the sort of peer-reviewed publications into a lot of areas: curriculum development, assessment tools, service on national organizations to develop educational guidelines, participation in efforts to enhance the experiences of those who are vulnerable in medicine, you name it, but they're all educator functions and work that people do. If you see yourself much more as a researcher, right, spending most of your time and energy, and phenotypically that's how you see yourself, the investigator or the researcher tracks are both options. The investigator track has a very, very different set of pressures than the researcher track. And the committee worked very hard a few years ago to take away what was this weird qualifier on the title in the researcher track. It was this title that made people feel like a second-rate citizen in terms of investigators. If that track sort of identified you on the research track, that's gone. It's assistant professor, associate professor, professor. And so some of the kind of dog and pony we've been spending our time doing is actually selling the researcher track. It's an amazing track for people who see themselves as an investigator, but they're not necessarily getting like 25 grants as PIs. They're not getting most of their funding from National Institutes of Health, et cetera. But if you phenotypically see yourself as a researcher mostly, then talk to your chair about the researcher track. But if you phenotypically feel like you are an educator and you look at our matrix, there's lots there that you're going to see and say, oh my God, that's totally me. That's totally what I've done. That's how I spend my time. That's what I care about. That's where the difference lies.
And if you run a division or you do something really important in terms of administration, that might send you another way. And that's another thing that you need to tell us about in your narrative section. You know, what is your success in running this division? Or what have you implemented in your department that's brought around change? And in the addendum, you can also brag about or tell us about your patient profiles and how big your panel is and how you've grown it and where people are coming from to see you. And your referrals are coming from. We give a lot of opportunity for you to tell us everything about you. And we want to celebrate it with you.
Is this group, maybe by a show of hands, interested in seeing either of the addenda? We have the CESE addenda and the CPAL addendum. Yes? Okay, great. Because I know you may not have done this in your previous promotion. So I can drive, but Rena, if you want to talk us through any of it, please take the reins.
Sure. So one is that this is not duplicative. So it is not meant for you to rehash what's in your CV. We actually have on the APT website a document that shows you by color. It's like a red bar about what's collected in the CV versus what's collected on the information addendum. The one thing I will say, Lauren, is I believe this, if you have the 23 version, that is not the accurate version. We have had to make updates based on executive orders and compliance with executive orders in the country. So I would just make sure that when people go to the site, there are certain changes to this that reflect the more updated version. But let's use this one table as an example.
This should be, I just recently downloaded it, but maybe
Okay, we can just use one of these tables.
Yeah,
we'll just use one of these tables. So if you go up a tiny bit, this is the development or adoption of innovative teaching methods grounded in the learning principles such as simulation, SP, virtual reality, lab, team-based, and it's really teaching methodology. And for every single table that you will see in the addendum, we give you an example or two that shows you how succinct you need to be here. So this is not an educator's portfolio with long narratives. It's really very specific. So in this example, you have here somebody who talks about a small group discussion session. Their role was as a co-developer with doctors X and Y. The session title was the human microbiome case analysis in the graduate school. So it tells you, you can list which program you're teaching in, the level of learners, the number of learners, the evaluation summary, and the years you've implemented it. And so for any of these tables that you see in the information addendum, there might be tables you have no rows, and there might be certain tables where you have a lot of rows. You do not have to say, oh my God, I have 6 tables with 4 rows. Is that enough? I have 3 tables with nothing. Realize that this is the breadth of educational output and work that educators are engaged in. So it goes from things like teaching methods to other things that you'll see when Lauren scrolls down. But for each of them, you literally click and type as you do it. This is integration of topics that align with our mission, vision, and core values. Now, I realize, Lauren, this is the accurate version, but CIMA needs to change the top. But that is actually a changed period of language that you will see there. And this is an example where you have to think about what Sinai's vision, mission, and values are, which are available actually on our website. But you can, I know, infer what those are in general. This is an example of a discussion group. The person was a session facilitator. The title was Understanding Structural Determinants of Health for the undergraduate medical education and nursing school. Again, very, very succinct. Next one.
I think this looks very daunting when you first look at it, but it actually stimulates you to remember to put things that you might have not thought that we are interested in considering for you. So just, take a couple of minutes and don't be angry that you have to fill it out.
Mm-hmm. And use this grid for your annual meeting with your mentor and your chair. It gives you such a good indication of the areas, if you feel like an educator, that you can grow into and be participating more in. Because when you sit down with your chair, you'll say, wow, I haven't done a lot of the national stuff or the regional stuff. It gives me an opportunity to think about it and build on it. So this is a great tool to use along the way to your promotions.
And let me add to
sorry,
that.
Go ahead, Isabel.
It's okay. I'm the chair of the Appointments and Promotions Committee in my department, and my faculty who wants to get promoted get stuck in this addendum. And as Rena and Meg said, it's really not daunting. And I assure them that, once you start clicking on these the bullets, it's quite easy. And it's and Meg said, you remember what your activities are in the last 10 years or so, or last 5 years. So yeah, this is where they get stuck, and it takes them months and months to fill out this form. But once they start doing it, then it's a breeze.
And to Isabel's point, the key with all this to going forward is to not leave your APT materials till the last minute. You cannot, because it'll start looking sloppy, it'll be incomplete. This is such an important part of your journey that we need to build in time for ourselves to do it, because the clarity of it and the completeness of it really is for a big deal. It's not for something small.
I think the other point about this is that you don't need to complete every single chart here. You may not fit into every single chart here. That's okay. You just want to complete the charts that fit the work that you've done in education. I think the trick sometimes is to figure out how to remember all those things that you did. Sometimes one of my tricks is to use my Outlook calendar, which obviously doesn't go back all as far as it may need to, but it does have a lot of the things that I've done, right? So I might just search in my Outlook calendar, or if I knew about certain things, I will be able to sort of help me remember what I did and when I did it. Okay, anything else on here, Rena, that I should show?
But this is great. So each one you'll see an example, you'll see some rows, it's all very self-explanatory.
I also have the CPAL one. Have to figure out. Can you guys see it now? Okay. Just we don't have to go through it in that kind of detail, but just so you know, if you haven't looked at this recently, the kinds of things that you need to be talking about, right? So Meg mentioned this, but how long have you been in practice? How big is your practice? How many patients are you seeing new weekly? Is it growing? Is it complex? Do you collaborate with others? Do people seek your opinion or refer patients to you? Do patients refer patients to you? Do other providers refer patients to you? Where are those patients located? Are they, outside of, the immediate New York area? So, there's a lot of potential things that can show your impact as a clinician. And they're really listed here to help sort of jog your brain and think about what you can talk about here. All right. Are there any questions from the group at all? We have about a minute or so, 2 minutes.
Okay, let's just beat this dead horse. Every one of you needs to have your CV sitting on your desktop now. Every 2 months, every 3 months, you need to go and fill it out. And luckily, the newest is last, so you don't have to reformat every time. You just have to fill everything in. And again, Rena said, don't wait till the last minute. The CV, if it's not up to date, is also daunting, and you forget things. And again, as Isabel said, typos, missing information are just, we have to think that you are hiding something rather than you were just not fastidious enough, and that does not look well for you guys. So keep up with I still do it all the time. I have a CV with the date on my desktop, and I come back from a meeting, I just type in what I did, and it's annoying, but when you really need it, you'll be very glad that it's up to date.
You can also use the CV and this discussion as, if you're not ready to go for promotion like this year, what are the things, where are the gaps in your CV that you need to start filling in now? And one of the things that we talked about last time was using your network to get those talks that you need to get, right? So the people you meet at conferences, the friends within your department that came from other institutions, right? Make connections, say, hey, I have this talk about X. Can you connect me with someone that might need a, grand rounds for a division or a department and start doing those things now in preparation for, being able to show it on your CV. The beautiful thing about COVID is that, you can pretty much do a virtual talk anywhere. And you don't have to fly, you don't have to pay, and you don't have to ask anyone to pay for you. So take advantage of that and try to get yourself out there. All right. Well, we'll see you all back in the big group in just a minute.
We are now starting the breakout room for the investigator and research tracks.
My name is Naomi Shaw. I'm going to be moderating this small group discussion here for the CV for promotion to associate to full professor. I am Vice Chair of Medicine and also Associate Dean for Faculty Career Advancement, work in the Office of Faculty Development. Since we have a small group, maybe we could just have each of us introduce quickly, just a one-liner where you are. And I'll start with the panelists, really appreciate their time. And the first person I have is Dr. Sultan.
Thanks, Naomi. Yeah, I'm a professor of neuroscience and have a secondary in geriatrics. And we do primarily these days Alzheimer's disease related basic science type work.
Fabulous. I have Dr. Beaker. Am I pronouncing it correctly?
Beaker, yeah. Yes, I'm a professor in the cell developmental and regenerative biology, and I work mostly on the red blood cell transcriptional regulatory mechanisms.
Thank you. Dr. Fetterman?
Hi, everybody. I'm Alex Fetterman. I'm a professor in the Department of Medicine. Also have a secondary in the Department of Geriatrics and Palliative Medicine. And we do work on health services research and older adults, cognitive issues, and self-management of chronic illness.
So, this is open for questions, so feel free to ask anything you have. We do have some other questions we've prepared and received, maybe from some of you or others who are not able to join, so we can go to those if you don't have questions, but I want to open it up for all of you first.
I had one question. So let's say I accomplished, I checked all the boxes, and I got another R01. Is there still an expected amount of time that I need to wait between associate and professor? Or once I have it, can I go ahead and apply for tenure and professorship?
Any of our panelists want to take that?
I can comment. I'll take a quick shot. I think in general, if you checked off all of the boxes, it's generally good. I think in my experience, when it's a short time as an associate professor, you're going to get a little bit more scrutiny. So you're going to want to make sure that you're really solid, that you've got the R1s, you got good papers and like high impact papers, not just volume, but really high quality stuff is going to matter. So, expect more scrutiny if you go up early.
What's the expected amount of time usually between associate and professor?
That seems to vary, but I mean, typically, I don't know what you guys also think. I would say up to 3 to 5 years, I would think, because I mean, the thing is, you also want to show that you've got an arc of continuing. It's you could argue it's more of the same, but in a way that's true. You want to be convincing people that you are really moving forward in terms of grants, in terms of publications, in terms of service, external and internally, and that tends to not just happen very quickly in a couple of years. You want to have really build things up so that then people aren't going to get stalled on it. Well, gee, why is this person coming up after 2 years? We just discussed this person. Otherwise, as Alex said, things are going to get stalled, and you want to just try to avoid that. I don't know, Steve, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, I think you're going to get evaluated on what you've done since your last promotion.
Yeah.
And so if you're only 2 years in, the chances are, unless you're really, really good, you're not going to have oodles of publications in 2 years. And so you have to be, a little bit careful. New grants that you've gotten maybe over those 2 years are great. I think people are looking at your trajectory in part, and hopefully it's on a nice positive incline. But the bottom line is you don't want to short yourself by having a limited amount of time to show sort of a maximum amount of productivity.
Yeah.
And so we're kind of looking also for you going up for professor to show that you've expanded your international reputation, your administrative leadership roles, your leadership roles at study sections, things like that, perhaps at meetings where you run particular sessions. So it all sort of adds up. But the one thing that seems to be preferred now from an institutional standpoint is that you would potentially go up for associate professor with tenure after associate professor. It's not absolute by any stretch, but I think that kind of associate professor to associate professor with tenure and then to professor with tenure is kind of the way the leadership, I think, is sort of pushing APT. And so that's something else to think about. You may not want to go up. You could go up for professorship. You could go up for tenure. You probably would have to be looking remarkably good on your output to go up for professor with tenure.
If you do it separately, you need to do all the process twice, right? All the letters and everything.
Yeah.
But no, I agree. I think that's definitely been in the last year since we've been having these discussions, definitely the two-step process rather than a one-step. I mean, there may be exceptions, but I think, the two-step thing is really what's being preferred by the leadership.
Great. Those were great responses, and I hope that answers your question. Lucas, do you have a question? I see you unmuted.
Yes. First, thank you everyone for this meeting. It's really helpful. I'm taking notes all the time here. My question is about the publications. I imagine you would expect the PI to have senior and less author publications. But what type of impact factors are you expecting? What type of journals? Is it like only Nature, Cell, science level journals, or what is the expectation?
I can give it a try. I mean, we don't really look at impact factor. I mean that number. I mean, it's funny when I've reviewed for international, and a lot of clearly in some of these places you have to put in the impact factor of your journal after every publication. I mean, that seems sort of foreign. That's not what comes up. I think the idea is that in terms of first or senior, definitely that's what's coming up. And as was indicated in the previous session, if you're in the middle and you made a significant contribution, you add a sentence saying, this is what I contributed, so that people don't just discount, oh, he's a middle author here. So that's important. And in terms of the impact of the journal, I think in general, I don't know, Steve and Alex, you can see what you think. I think that becomes pretty apparent from looking at the whole CV, and also from the letters. I think if you've not become well known in your field, or say you are well known in your field, even though maybe I haven't heard of some of the journals or I'm not familiar with the journals because they're not in my field, that's not necessarily going to come back against you. Clearly, Cell Science, Nature, sure. That's very noticeable, but that's not the only thing we're looking for here. I don't know if you guys can see what you think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's totally right. I mean, so the impact factor, a really sexy journal really only will probably sway people if the person is publishing 1 or 2 papers a year. Mm-hmm. And then it's, great if they're really high profile and really high impact journals. But in general, we don't tend to nitpick about where things are published just because there are so many journals out there. And in many cases, if you don't put the impact factors in, they're not obvious from the journal titles. And, it's kind of shocking when the impact factors go into journals that are not in our primary area of interest as to how actually wide read certain journals are. So I would say don't worry as much about the impact factors unless you're perhaps only publishing 1 or 2 papers a year. And if they're in Nature or Cell, I don't think you're going to get much kickback from the APT committee.
Yeah. And I would just add to that, those comments, considering those comments, you can use any high impact publications, top tier journal publications in your narrative to highlight sort of the very high quality, cutting edge nature or impactfulness of the work that you're doing. So that's a great way to really kind of spotlight your work in the narrative and use the narrative to strong effect. So
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate the answers. Can I just do a quick follow-up question? It's about the number of publications. I heard 1 or 2 papers per year, but that really depends on the field, right? In my field, I don't think it would be really hard for someone in my field to publish 1 or 2 papers as senior author per year. It happens when the person has a big lab, but at the level of associate professor, it's a bit harder to do. So what are you always expect? Is this like the number or like 5? No, it doesn't. How do you calculate that? It's a hard question.
No, we don't look at numbers. We actually weigh the CV, and I'm just kidding. But so don't worry about numbers at all. I think we're looking for the fact that you're driving a lab, that you're a senior author on papers that rather than X number of this impact factor number kind of thing. So everything gets weighed. And I think the most important thing generally is not to get caught up in any one particular section of your CV, that we're going to look at pretty much everything as
Wonderful.
As a whole.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I would just add though that I agree completely. It's just you want to avoid a gap though. Like if there's a 3-year gap in publications, that's going to stand out, and it's going to be like what happened. Now, of course, if that's followed by some major high impact publication, you could say, okay, probably took a while to get the paper out, but so on the one hand, don't worry about the publications. On the other hand, you want to avoid having a gap, especially at this stage. You probably have a series of publications, and that should just continue, as opposed to having a break. Now, unless there's some circumstance, obviously, I'm not talking about that. Anyway, but I agree with Steve that it's we're not looking at X number per year.
And I'm just putting something in the chat, Lucas, that doesn't really, just says what the current criteria are, but it just says number of top publications. So it's not since promotion, but just sort of what they're looking for. And that number is like 5 generally. So as long as over your career you have good publications that you can then count towards those, it works. So I see Himanshu has their hand up.
Yeah, so sometimes it could be that you may be involved in a research activities where there might be not so many publications. However, it may be very crucial part of in terms of the pursuit of healthcare research. So the number, that threshold of 5 maybe cannot be achievable sometimes. Whereas the number of clinical trials, which are kind of someone can interpret as like mission critical activities. So how will those type of instances be reviewed?
So clinical trials generally on the research or investigator track are a little unusual. I mean, so for what we're kind of talking about, it probably doesn't factor in as strongly. But if you're on the clinician educator or one of the clinical tracks, then for sure, I think those will be critical. Like I said, we factor in everything, but I think most of the CVs that we're evaluating for these tracks don't have, a huge emphasis on clinical trial number, and so we're falling back on publications and grants. And I would add to Lucas that if you go 3 years without a publication, that's probably also going to negatively impact your ability to get grant funding, at least in the current state of things. So it's kind of a tricky walk. You want to kind of keep your productivity up. APT may not jump all over you, but my impression is the grant agencies these days, just look for things to jump all over in terms of derailing your proposals.
Okay. Thank you.
And I think the only word that comes to mind is a holistic review. So nothing is really concrete. There are no numbers for really anything specifically. It's how everything comes together. And I think all of the panelists have said it in really nice ways, but there is no magic number for anything. There's none. It's just trajectory, sort of leadership, your impact, contributions, publications, and then funding, and also existing funding, right? So if you have 3 R1s and they're going to expire the year you're going up for promotion, that could be an issue, right? So it's really, timing is important from what I have seen as well. So just wanted to add that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And also the other thing that is out of control, so to speak, are the outside letters. I mean, sometimes, in terms of putting the CV together and doing everything you can, that's really you're doing that. And your chair is hopefully going to support you and write a really strong nomination letter. That's fine. But then the other variable is the outside letters. And I think those are very important. And in some cases where maybe we're discussing things and about the CV, and we'll read these letters, which are phenomenal. We'll think, okay, wow, this person is well recognized, especially at this level. If we're talking about national and international recognition, I mean, that can really sway things in a very positive way. Obviously, of course, a negative letter is not good, but anyway, but I agree completely with what Naomi said, that it's the whole picture. But the letters coming from outside also add into it.
Thank you, James. We have 4 minutes left. We probably can take one more question. I just put a resource in the chat. It's somebody we work with in the Department of Medicine who, for a fee, can help you with your CV and all documents related to your CV. So I don't have a personal, relationship, but we have been using this person. They are trained in the Sinai format. And if you are pressed for time and you need help, just look at that billing structure and the contact information is there. So in case that's useful. Does anybody else have any questions? Anything our panelists want to give in terms of tips for any of our attendees? The questions I have here from 2025 I can post, but I think we've covered a lot of them.
Mohammed had a question in the chat. I know he's not here. I mean, it was basically, the answer to that, in addition to yours, Naomi, is that the APT committee generally respects the rank that the department requests and the track that the department requests. And so that's where that gets generated. And so unless there's a major problem that kind of comes out of the APT discussion, that it's an inappropriate rank or it's an inappropriate track. We do our best to do what the department asks. And sometimes we say, wow, this person could be on this track instead of that track, or this person, should have been promoted X number of years ago. But basically, we're kind of tied into what the department requests.
Yeah, I agree we really try to respect that. I mean, in terms of a higher rank or something different, we don't go for that. We don't push back on that. On the other hand, if we feel like it's really inappropriate, then we talk to the chair and say, hey, you've got some problems here. But we try to respect what the nomination letter says and just stick with that.
I mean, I guess one of the questions just in the last minute and a half is, do you have advice on advancing promotion to associate professor with versus without tenure? And I think we covered this in terms of, that is sort of the next step typically before a professor. And, I think it's a conversation that maybe everybody should be having with their department chair or division chief, sort of understand when they are ready to put you up. But I don't know if any of our panelists want to comment on how you can have that conversation, or how can you plan for that, or when do you do that?
In the 8 seconds, I would say that tenure needs grant support, basically.
Okay.
So that's the only thing to be aware of, that if you're going up for tenure, the committee, at least in the past, has always looked for good, active grant support with a certain longevity associated with it.
Yeah, I would just add that quickly that, I believe most departments, you have a yearly meeting with your chair. I mean, they're supposed to fill out these forms. That would be the point to say, hey, what do you think? Is this the right time for this next step for me?
I think you're even required to answer that.
That's true. That's true, actually.
Right? On that form.
Yeah. Well, this has been great. We have 9 seconds and counting down. So thank you all for joining. We'll see you on the other side.
Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for sticking around. We hope this session was helpful to you. We wish you all the best in your preparation for promotion and success. I imagine that the folks on this call would be happy to offer additional advice if you needed it. And certainly you can always send a message to the Office of Faculty Development, OFD, at mssm.edu. If you have a question, we can certainly direct you to wherever that can best be answered. So thank you all and good luck. And thanks to our panelists and our speakers today. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend.
Bye, thank you.